Welcome to this explainer on the absolutely wild history of Pepsi. We're going to look at how this company went from being a literal bankrupt pharmacy ripoff to an absolute mega conglomerate. And trust me, this journey is anything but a straight line. We are talking about a history involving bizarre Soviet barters, recycled beer bottles, and even deadly street riots. You might think you know this soda brand, but the story behind it is completely insane. Just to give you an idea of the sheer scale we're talking about here, today, PepsiCo pulls in a staggering $80 billion in revenue every single year. $80 billion. That is actually more than double the revenue of the Coca-Cola company. They are a massive global dominator. But, as you'll see in just a minute, they definitely did not start out on top. In fact, for a really long time, they were the ultimate underdog. So, that leads us to the ultimate question we're unpacking today. How exactly did a brand that went bankrupt, not once, but twice, survive long enough to become an $80 billion empire? Like, how do you go from losing absolutely everything to owning half the grocery store aisle? Well, what's really mind-blowing about all this is that throughout the 1920s and 30s, Coca-Cola actually had the chance to buy a struggling Pepsi on 3 separate occasions, and Coke turned them down every single time. They literally didn't even see Pepsi as a threat. Imagine the billions of dollars Coke could have saved themselves if they had just bought out their future biggest rival when they had the chance. Okay, Section 1, the healthy cola ripoff. To figure out where Pepsi actually came from, we gotta go all the way back to 1892 in North Carolina. A pharmacist named Caleb Bradham created a syrup mix he initially just called Brad's Drink. Catchy, right? By 1898, he renamed it Pepsi Cola. Now, why Pepsi? Well, it actually comes from the Greek word pepsis, which means to digest. See, Coca-Cola was already super popular, but Bradham thought it contained harmful addictive chemicals. So he specifically designed Pepsi Cola to be a true health drink. He wanted something that relieved indigestion using natural flavors, rare oils, and fruit juice, while still delivering that sweet cola taste everyone already loved. Which brings us to Section 2, bankruptcies and brilliant comebacks. For a while, Caleb Bradham was doing great. By 1915, his company's assets were worth over $1 million. But world events were about to bring his entire company to its knees. During World War I, strict rationing caused the price of sugar to absolutely skyrocket. To put it in perspective, before the war, sugar was just 5 cents a pound. During the ration, it jumped to 22 cents per pound. Bradham assumed prices would just keep rising, so he poured huge amounts of money into stockpiling massive reserves of sugar. He thought this would outsmart his competitors and secure cheap production for years to come. But wow, did that gamble fail spectacularly. Just 6 months later, the price of sugar crashed all the way back down to just 3 cents a pound. Bradham had spent far more on sugar than the company could ever hope to earn back, and the market value of his massive stockpile was completely wiped out. This single massive mistake bankrupted Pepsi in 1920. Bradham lost it all. And shockingly, after being bought out, Pepsi actually declared a second bankruptcy in 1931 during the Great Depression. So yeah, they went bankrupt not once, but twice. So desperate for a comeback, the new owners, the Loft Candy Company, pulled off this brilliant pivot. And it really shows how necessity breeds innovation. They started packaging Pepsi in recycled beer bottles. This allowed them to sell a 12-ounce bottle of soda for exactly 5 cents. Meanwhile, Coca-Cola was selling half that amount, just 6 ounces, for the exact same price. For cash-strapped families during the Great Depression, getting double the soda for a nickel was an absolute lifesaver. And because of that, sales finally began to explode. And they just kept this massive momentum rolling right through the mid-century with some incredibly smart marketing. First, they bought cheap, super catchy 15-second radio jingles that got stuck in everyone's heads. Then, when World War II hit, they changed their brand colors to a patriotic red, white, and blue. Crucially, they also successfully tapped into the completely overlooked African-American market by hiring an all-black sales and marketing team, something their competitors were just entirely ignoring at the time. Later on, a new CEO brought in some serious Hollywood glamour by partnering with his wife, the famous actress Joan Crawford, to elevate the brand from its poor man of cola image into something incredibly stylish. Moving on to Section 3, building a mega conglomerate. Okay, so having secured their survival and popularity at home in the US, Pepsi set its sights on global and sometimes highly unusual expansion. Back in 1959, following an American National Exhibition in Moscow, Pepsi actually managed to agree to a deal to become the first American brand sold in the Soviet Union. But there was a bizarre logistical nightmare. The Kremlin placed strict controls on their currency, the ruble. It couldn't legally be traded internationally, which essentially made it totally worthless outside the USSR. So think about it. How do you trade when a currency is completely useless to you? The brilliant solution? A literal barter system. Pepsi traded its cola syrup concentrates directly to the Soviet Union, and in return, the USSR gave Pepsi exclusive U.S. distribution rights to Stolichnaya vodka. Pepsi could take that Soviet vodka, sell it in the United States for US dollars, and make their profit. Years later, when vodka wasn't enough to cover the sheer volume of soda being sold, Pepsi even negotiated to receive Soviet commercial freight ships just to keep the trade alive. Talk about a crazy business deal. Meanwhile, back in the US, Pepsi was making moves that would literally change the grocery store forever. In 1965, they merged with the snack company Frito-Lay to create PepsiCo. They realized people bought soda and snacks together anyway, so why not own both? This created a gargantuan conglomerate. Today, they own Gatorade, Mountain Dew, Lay's, Doritos, Quaker Oats. At one point in the late 20th century, they even bought KFC, Taco Bell, and Pizza Hut, literally just to force those massive restaurant chains to drop Coca-Cola and serve exclusively Pepsi products. Now for Section 4, billion-dollar marketing disasters. You know, operating at this kind of massive global scale means that when mistakes happen, they aren't just little slip-ups. The consequences can be utterly disastrous, costing billions and even costing lives. In 1992, Pepsi launched a bottle cap lottery in the Philippines called Number Fever. You buy a Pepsi, look under the cap, and if your number is announced on the evening news, you win a cash prize. The grand prize was 1 million pesos, which was about $50,000, life-changing money. It was so wildly successful that half the country's population was participating. So, Pepsi decided to extend the contest for 5 extra weeks. But their computer system wasn't designed for the extension, and it led to a fatal glitch. The whole glitch revolved around one specific number, 349. This was the grand prize-winning number. It was supposed to be printed on exactly 2 bottle caps, meaning Pepsi only ever planned to give away 2 grand prizes. But the glitch caused the number 349 to be printed on over 600,000 caps. Suddenly, hundreds of thousands of people thought they had won $50,000. This created a staggering $30 billion liability that Pepsi simply couldn't and, well, literally wouldn't, pay. When Pepsi refused to pay out the full amounts, offering only a tiny fraction as a goodwill gesture, the country just erupted. It sparked violent street riots. People were throwing Molotov cocktails into Pepsi factories and bombing their delivery trucks. Tragically, these riots resulted in 5 deaths and widespread destruction. It really highlights a very dark chapter in their history, where a simple corporate computer glitch yielded devastating real-world consequences. Ultimately, after all of that, Pepsi was only ordered to pay a relatively insignificant fine of $150,000. And honestly, this wasn't their only major marketing misstep. In 1996, they famously had to defend themselves in court after a business student realized the math in one of their joke commercials actually worked out. So he went ahead and raised $700,000 to buy 7 million points to claim a $23 million military Harrier jet. Pepsi had to fight him in court, claiming it was obviously just a joke. And much more recently, they faced intense global backlash for a highly controversial protest ad featuring Kendall Jenner, which was heavily criticized across the board for being incredibly tone-deaf to serious social justice protests. All right, Section 5, the ultimate cola war. Despite those billion-dollar blunders and dark controversies, we've got to look at the one marketing campaign that defined a generation and almost dethroned their biggest rival forever, the legendary 1975 Pepsi Challenge. Pepsi went around filming regular consumers taking blind taste tests between Coke and Pepsi. And guess what? A slight majority of participants actually preferred the taste of Pepsi. Even when Coca-Cola nervously ran their own secret blind taste tests, they got the exact same result. It sent absolute shockwaves through the industry. Pepsi had proven they actually had the better-tasting product. This undeniable data terrified Coca-Cola so much that they made a truly historic blunder. In 1985, Coke actually abandoned their century-old iconic recipe to create a sweeter, new Coke that could beat Pepsi in blind taste tests. The result? Massive, overwhelming consumer backlash. People absolutely hated that their beloved traditional Coca-Cola was gone, and they revolted against the new formula. But here's the crazy part. This massive mistake by Coke
actually ended up being the very thing that saved them. When Coke finally caved to the pressure and brought back the classic formula, the sheer relief and gratitude from consumers was unprecedented. It completely cemented an unbreakable brand loyalty. People were no longer talking about the Pepsi challenge, they were just thrilled to have their classic Coke back. Even a better tasting Pepsi couldn't defeat that deep emotional connection.
So, as we look at the vast array of snacks and sodas in our pantries today, and reflect on a company that survived rationing, recessions, and their own massive blunders to become an $80 billion giant, it leaves us with one fascinating question to ponder. In the brutal world of corporate empires, does having a scientifically proven better-tasting product even matter if your rival holds the ultimate unbreakable brand loyalty? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I really hope it gave you a whole new perspective on that soda sitting in your fridge.